what I want to talk about today is just sort of establish some facts that are questioned by the mainstream press and academia and so forth. Namely, that there is such a thing as a global working class, and that it is growing larger, not getting smaller, and that it is to a greater degree than in the past tied together internationally in a way that I will talk about in a few minutes. And hopefully, if I have time towards the end of this, to relate this to what's going on at Amazon now. First of all, Kyle, can we get the slides up? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, okay, we can move to the next one. I wish I could do this. Yeah, all right. This is just to kind of show you the growth of the international workforce. And obviously not everybody in these numbers are working class in a technical sense, but the vast majority are. We can see now these are people who are considered employed in international statistics. And almost half of them are women now. So that the world working class, its employed part of the working class is now half women. The smaller figures down at the bottom tell you that 53% of all of these are wage and salary workers, and the rest are self-employed or family workers, and we're not going to include employers, obviously, here. Now, what about that? You know, the informal economy, these categories from the past. What I would argue, and what more and more studies show, is that people who are classified as independent contractors, self-employed workers, the so-called gig economy, which is quite large if you think of it that way, and in international terms, particularly in developing countries, that most of these workers now are in fact tied into international global supply chains. That is, they are tied into production chains that might end up producing a car in Michigan, where the parts come from somewhere in Asia and so forth. Or it might be a shoe that you get and someone working at home cut out of leather the tongue of the shoe, and that's all. They're not considered an employee, but they're paid by capital directly or indirectly, and they work for capital, and they have no choice but to work for capital. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Furthermore, the world economy is not post-industrial, that manufacturing and industry in general has continued to grow. The world economy is growing more slowly. It is more crisis-ridden and so forth. But nonetheless, manufacturing tends to be, and related industrial work tends to be growing, because quite simply, there is no job in the world, service or otherwise, that can be done without things. We all need things, so it's important to understand the material nature of the world, and that we still live in basically an industrial world, and that people who are classified as service workers are in fact often part of manufacturing supply chains and necessary parts of moving parts from one thing to another, and so on. So we do live in a very material world in which capitalists produce goods as commodities, although services are also commodities produced by capital, that is, produced by the workers who work for capital in these supply chains. Let's go on with the next slide. Okay, it does so in the context of crisis, however, and this is an important point. I'm not going to dwell on it a lot. It's fairly obvious, the ups and downs of the world economy. This is on a world scale. The dropping red line, of course, is the COVID collapse of the world economy, which was actually in the making even before the pandemic caused it to go even deeper than usual. and will not be the last one that we see. Okay, next one. All right, this is just the same idea, only in terms of unemployment. And if you can notice slightly, one of the interesting things is in the last 20 years, the unemployment, when it goes down with the recovery, each time it never goes as far down, so that unemployment stays on a global level, stays higher. Although these are U.S. figures, but nonetheless, it's true internationally as well. Okay, the next one. In all of this, we know there is growing class, race, and global inequality, inequality between the classes, racial inequality, gender inequality, and inequality between nations. So that capitalism's claim to even things out somehow across the world is just so much baloney. It continues to make inequality even greater. Now let's move on to the next one, which is actually mostly what I want to talk about. No, it's not, but all right. The working class upsurge. Those of you who came in early enough to see all the slides that were put up initially will already have a pretty good idea of this. This just gives you some sense of what it takes to create an upsurge that has in fact been in the making and going on. Like this one consultancy found that in 1 year, 2019, 47 nations, that's like a quarter of all nations, experienced what they call civil unrest, what we would call a social upsurge or mass strikes, 64 general strikes in Europe over this period, and so on with the figures, and with massive strikes in China in particular. And we have to include in this, since we're looking at things globally, the global Black Lives Matter movement. This is a movement that here in the UK, and it just exploded out of nowhere. It completely abolished the British myth that racism is somehow an American problem, when in fact it's the product of slavery, colonialism, and racism throughout Europe and around the world, in fact. Okay, so we know, I didn't bother going into all the details of the various upsurges. Some of them were mentioned earlier in the introduction by Jolene. But we can see that we are in a period that is not normal in that respect, that people are beginning to fight back. And if we go back to that question of, say, the self-employed workers and so forth, in most of the studies I've seen of a lot of these recent upsurges, these in fact are the people who fill the streets. You know, it's not so much as some articles say, the middle class or something like that. It is often organized workers. Myanmar, the public sector workers kind of let it off, but others have joined in. But all of these kind of working class people, even if they don't have a regular job, have been tending to join in these kind of mass upsurges that are taking place across governments completely around the world. Okay, let's go on. All right, now here is really what I wanted to get to, and this will relate a lot to Amazon. Capitalism has been in crisis for a long time, yet it gets out of these crises. It has kind of three increases. That is something they've always been doing. That is making us work harder. It says my internet connection is unstable. Is that so?
You cut out for a second, but you're back now. So hopefully it will stick with us.
All right. Productivity, making us work harder, investing more in technology and machinery and so forth to make us work harder, produce more value for capital and so forth. Well, that worked for a long time, the 50s and 60s after World War II, but it didn't work so much after that. So globalization, the expansion of capital all around the world, was another way of raising profits. That worked for a while, but then that's kind of lost its its ability to make the sort of profits they want or need. And the most recent thing, and I think this is important, is speed, just simply speed. And I don't just mean speed up on the job. I mean the speed up of everything. It begins with lean production. Now it's more surveillance, algorithms, all of this sort of thing that guides more and more types of work around the world. Again, Amazon being the prime example of this, but by no means the only one. Speed in every sense, speed of the production process, speed of moving things from one supplier to another, one part of the production process to another, speed of getting the product to the market so they can realize their profits, and all of that sort of thing. Time-based competition. Companies now compete with each other on the basis of their ability to deliver a product or a service in the shortest amount of time. Again, Amazon with the next day delivery, is an obvious example of this. Marx called this the annihilation of space, that is distance by time. If capital can make things, can turn over their investment faster, they can get greater profits. But in order to do that, they have to have a global material and integrated logistics infrastructure. We know some of this familiar stuff: railroads, planes, cables, undersea cables for the data transmission, and all of these things. These have become, in the last 20 years, much more integrated globally, much more driven by data, and much more dependent on each other. But the thing to keep in mind, because these are all material things, let me just say something about the cyberspace or whatever, the cloud. And the cloud and cyberspace are material things. They're composed of data centers, which are enormous users of energy, but which also require considerable labor, and cables, underground and under earth and in the sky, cables, etc., material equipment. And so my point here is that all these things require the hand and mind of labor at every step in the whole process of capital creating its profits. If we move it, we can stop it. And that, I think, is the most important thing to understand. However, we have to learn how to do that. And let me just go on in the last few minutes here and say something about Amazon. This organizing drive in Bessemer, Alabama is obviously extremely important. We really have to hope they win, and so forth. There's also another less well-known effort going on in Iowa by the Teamsters. And the Teamsters seem to have a secret plan that they say they're going to try to organize the whole thing. I somehow lack a lot of faith in that idea, but nonetheless, the organization, I believe, of Amazon, particularly in the case of the United States, but also around the world, the next largest place for Amazon isn't Europe, it's actually India. But I think these things are important. Well, what is Amazon? Amazon, let me say first that while there is an organizing drive going on at one or two facilities around the country now, and some efforts within Amazon warehouses that are not official union ones, but that are there, it's good to keep in mind that Amazon now has 819 facilities in the United States alone. That's double what it had 2 years ago. And it has another 268 planned for the next year or two. Its workforce has jumped from 500,000 in 2019 to about 850,000, some say 1 million now. In other words, this company is growing at an astronomical rate as people couldn't go to the stores, so they're buying more things online and all of that. And I think that's a trend that will probably continue even after the pandemic, if there is an after the pandemic. So one or two organizing drives, when we're talking about over 800 facilities, obviously is not going to do the trick. So how is it going to be done? Well, I think first of all, it's going to require a rank and file mobilization of union members to help Amazon workers organize, to assist them, to talk to them, to provide mass picketing when that is required, or whatever is needed, to use these, most importantly, to begin to figure out, Amazon is one big logistics system. Even more than its sales, it is the most sophisticated logistics system, in the United States since Walmart. And what that means is that among those 800 or more facilities, there are some that are key. And if the workers at Amazon can figure out which ones those are, and I don't claim to know that, but if they can figure that out, and you can get this information, then they can do something that I would consider analogous to the way General Motors was organized by the United Auto Workers in 1937. What did they do? They had a series of sit-down strikes, and that is plant occupations of General Motors plants in Flint, Michigan, which was the primary GM location at that time. And they didn't work. Finally, they occupied Chevrolet plant number 4, and that brought down the whole GM system and caused GM to continue. Well, what was Chevy for? Chevy 4 produced all the engines for all models of Chevrolet, their main seller. And so where is the node in the logistics system, the choke points in Amazon's system that can be used to help the workers themselves organize Amazon? I think that's I think the way we have to begin to think strategically about organizing, and forget about the NLRB and even this new law that the Democrats may or may not pass, the PRO Act and so forth. As far as I can tell from looking at it, it'll do some good things for gig workers and things like that, redefining that as employees. But for most things, it's not going to change all that much of the way these things go. So I think we're going to have to rely not on the government or the NLRB, but on direct action by the workers themselves, finding the choke points in the system, and teaching other workers around the world that, this is the way we can go to regain the sort of, or gain the power that we need to begin to make the possibility of socialism or of revolution something that is tangible to more and more people. Thanks.